It's time for Doomed Discussions, brought to you by Doomed and Stoned. This is Billy Goate, your host from doomedandstone.com. With me, I've got two special guests, Tom Jordan from 20 Watt Tombstone and Matt Bacon from Dropout Media. And we're going to talk about conflict this afternoon. But first, welcome you guys to the show. Glad to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
No, yeah, it's deeply appreciated. I've wanted to be on the show for a while, so the fact that you invited me made me feel very special on the inside.
Oh, right on. Yeah, man. Sorry it's conflict that has to bring us together, but that's a good way to bring people together sometimes, I guess, one way or another. We're going to talk about the subject of conflict within bands, between bands and labels, between bands and vendors, between fans and bands. I mean, I've begun to wonder whether conflict is something that is just endemic to our scene, endemic to metal itself. How should we be thinking about this subject of conflict? First of all, do you guys notice it, or am I just kind of paranoid and noticing it more lately?
I definitely notice it.
I think there's sort of layers between genuine conflict and sort of scene drama.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of that has been exacerbated lately by the coronavirus situation. I feel like more than usual, and also the ongoing protests, I think more than usual you're seeing sort of the angry stoner rock Gen Xer saying regrettable things on Facebook. And it's usually just like, come on, buddy, like, come on, like, no. And it's very unfortunate to see, because I see it driving a lot of people apart from very good bands and from very cool, just hurting communities.
Yeah. I guess I would put myself in the Gen X category, though. I've, at various times in my life, been that angry Gen Xer, probably for different reasons than what you're seeing now. But yeah, I definitely see it across social media, and I see more people disconnecting from social media as a result, too. Tom, what are you seeing?
I'm seeing it a lot. I mean, I guess my scene here, this might get me in a little bit of trouble, but our scene here has been very full of conflict for years.
Mm-hmm.
I just think there's a lack of humility in people in general, and anytime you have something like music where there's a group of people working together who have a skill, and it's a performance art thing, I think they're people who can't be humble have this thing where they see someone else working within the environment they're working in, and they get competitive, which getting competitive is fine as long as it's healthy competition. But what bothers me is when I see, and we've all seen it, it's a band thing we've seen a million times, where it's like, well, that guy's band sucks, my band's better. I'm seeing more of that kind of mentality lately, here in Wisconsin. I'm seeing it online. It's just like, I think people being trapped in their houses for so long, they're getting crazy, and they're getting more emboldened by being locked up. So their feelings about stuff are more amplified. But yeah, I definitely see it. I think the coronavirus has, amplified it a lot. I think it was there to begin with, but I definitely feel like lately I've seen more of it, for sure.
Well, I think so I was talking about this with a friend of mine. I won't say his name, but he's in a very known tech death band. And we were talking about how there's so much drama in the technical death metal scene when it's a very small scene. And the conclusion we kind of came to is that technical death metal is a type of music that you have to practice for hours every day to perform, right? And the upper ceiling is like the Faceless, who probably played to 200 people a night on a good tour, and they practiced 10 hours a day every day for 10 years to get there. And I think it's the same thing across a lot of music, right? Where it's like, Tom knows how much effort goes into putting out a record. and then for that to, and it's all, and it's not just labor, it's also an emotional connection to your music, right? And it's like, this is the thing I'm proud of. So you spend all this time and money and yada yada yada, and then no one gives a shit, or people are mean to you on the internet. Like, of course you're gonna end up in fights with people, because you just spent all your fucking money and all your fucking time you could have spent with your wife and kids or friends or whatever to put out a record that people are making fun of. So, like, of course you're mad, or things didn't go the way you wanted them to go with the release for whatever reason. Maybe people aren't making fun of it, but you couldn't get shows booked or whatever. So of course people get it.
Yeah. I mean, that's race is actually a really good point. And that part of it is, for me, reviving this notion of empathy. When you are in a conflict, being able to step back from that and wonder what is driving or motivating the other person besides pure animus. Maybe there is something that you can strike a note of empathy with. And in the process, maybe we can talk about this a little bit later when we get into conflict resolution techniques that have worked for us. But, just understanding where people are coming from, I think is basic to conflict resolution 101.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've been thinking about the scene in general, and I think you're right, that a lot of it has to do with how much time, labor, and money that we put into this. And then we see other things that kind of ride against our investment. And I was wondering too whether there was just something about the nature of metal itself which just makes direct conflict more likely and actually more laudable. I mean, I think on the positive side, maybe we're more likely to get conflict out in the open rather than bury it for years. But I don't know if that's true or not. I think people are people, and you're going to have the passive aggressive conflict people, and you're going to have the more aggressive conflict people. But yeah, I think it comes down to personality and alcohol, whether alcohol is involved.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is, even when the metal scene is not getting along, they're a very tight scene. They're active together. Like like I played in blues bands before this, and rock bands and metal bands, and blues bands do not play shows together. They do not do 3-band shows. So you're not hanging out with 2 or 3 other bands. Country bands rarely do that. So I think part of it is the proximity to one another. You're doing a lot of shows where bands have a 20-minute, 30-minute set, and you got to have 4 or 5 bands on the bill. So you're all going to be together, more than if you're a blues band or a country band or, whatever. Right. I think that definitely plays a part.
Yeah, good point.
I think that's a big component. I think 2 other parts. One is the relatively low ceiling, like I mentioned before, right? Where it's like, oh God, we're scrabbling for maybe the biggest bands in this genre make 6 figures,
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like low, then it's like low 6 figures, which is cool, but it's not like a lot of money.
Right.
But then on top of that, I think, this will get people mad at me, but also I think you got a bunch of straight white guys, trying to do their thing together. Of course they're gonna butt heads. Just that, I think you can't really deny that,
sure,
demographic stupidity. And I say this in a group of 3 straight white guys.
Undoubtedly, yeah. There's definitely that testosterone.
But
factor
I think that's a big part of it. It's just that white male entitlement, making people think that, oh, it should revolve around me, and it's motherfucker.
Well, men in general, men in America are very proud people, and pride can get in the way of a lot of things. So,
yeah, I think that's definitely a big part of it, But yeah, and again, it's just you spent all your time on this thing, and now it's not working in the way you want it to work for whatever reason, And I think it's frustrating too, because I think a lot of times, and Tom can really attest to this, I think a lot of times people set goals that are relatively low, but even those goals are hard to achieve. That like playing to 50 people who came for you in your hometown.
Mm-hmm.
How long did that take you to get there, Tom?
Years. Years. I don't even know.
You know, and I know now you're like kind of, you know, cool in Wisconsin, but like
Not really.
I think you're cool in Wisconsin.
Well, thank you.
No, but like it took you guys like a while.
Yeah. There's no substitute for work, man. I mean, it's hard.
But like that's what it is, I think, right? Is like even you know, playing to 50 people in your hometown is like a pretty like not crazy goal.
Yeah.
You know? But like we all know bands who are like good guys who like do things the right way and hire the right PR and da 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 da. And you know, like people give a shit about the band, but they still can't play to 50 people at home.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so I think like when you do all this to not get 50 people to come to your release show, you know, I get why that builds aggravation.
Mm-hmm.
It's frustrating. It's a thankless job in a lot of ways. The reality is you know, in this business, you get kicked in the guts way more than you get, you know, rewarded. Like, especially if you're a touring guy. If you're a touring guy and you're playing 7 days a week, you know, most bands will tell you, unless you're huge, and even if you're huge sometimes, Friday and Saturday are probably going to be cool, but Tuesday and, you know, Columbus might be shitty, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it gets to you, you know. I understand why people get bitter in this business and get mad, because, you know, it's one of those things where you have to really take in the good stuff and absorb it as much as you can, so that when you hit these lows, you have the positivity to get through it to the next good time, you know, and the next good thing. And I think the conflict thing, I think a lot of it too is that people have high expectations for this when they get into it, and they maybe don't get what they wanted to get out of it, and they get frustrated, and then they take it out on other people in the scene. And it can be really good people. I know lots of good people here in town, great bands. We have an amazing scene here with some really great bands, but over the years, and not specifically right now, but over the years, you know, over the last 15 years, I've seen some real animosity between bands in the scene, just out of, you know, pure competitive nature, where it's like, well, my band's better, why am I not playing as much, why am I not making as much? And, you know, that stuff just builds up, and really good people can just turn bitter really quick, you know.
Here's a question for both of you guys. Which do you think become toxic faster or more toxic? Small scenes, like where Tom is from, just, you know, in terms of low population density, or sort of the bigger scenes that you and I, Billy, have in Portland and New York, respectively?
It could go both ways, right? Because in my thinking, the bigger things are, the less chance you have to really get to know people really well, which cuts down on the number of incidents of interpersonal conflict.
Sure.
It's also easier to depersonalize people if you haven't played with them, for example, and you maybe will not encounter them over the course of months and months, versus a smaller scene where it's a little bit more embarrassing if you have a fight with somebody and then you have to see them at the local coffee shop where you work the next day, you know. So maybe there's a little bit more incentive in a smaller scene to kind of get along. So I can kind of see it working both ways, but I'll probably lean more towards smaller scene is more likely to maybe handle conflict differently. I think they'll all have different types of conflict, but yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Tom?
That's a really good question. And I don't really know how to answer that. What I'll say is this. I can only say from my personal experience, but for me personally and my band, what I've seen is kind of all over the place. Like, you know, I've seen some really small markets where the bands were not very nice and very competitive. And then I've seen, you know, just the opposite. I think it really comes down to how badly people want to be cool and nice and that sort of thing. Because like we, you know, we play in Atlanta quite a bit, And I have to say, like, some of the bands from Atlanta are amazing. Like, there's not only some great talent there, but the bands are super humble and they hang out. They come to shows like when they're not playing, you know. But then places like Detroit, there's a lot of good bands there that we hang out with too. But there's a ton of bands we've played with up there that you know they're just not that way. So I guess I don't really know. I guess for me, what I'm going to go with is I think it really depends on the city and what type of music scene they have going for them. I think if they have like a strong community of people, not necessarily just in the music scene, but like, you know, there's people going out and hanging out with other people, being social. That seems to play into it. I think, you know, I think a strong social circle within a scene, you know, goes outside the scene. You know, I think it's the guys that you see that bring people to your shows, the guys that you see who, you know, are cool to hang out with. Those are the guys that are doing that kind of stuff outside of the band situation too.
Right.
Yeah. And I definitely think, you know, I think that idea of the ceiling comes in again, because I think if you're in a city where, you know, I think like in New York, the scene is so kind of sprawling that you can just avoid a band if you don't like them. You know what I mean? I think it operates differently. You know, I also think that when you have a scene where there's like actual opportunity, you know, like you can play a show in New York, like you can like open for like a mid-level touring band, and like guys from like 4 labels will just be there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that kind of makes things a little bit cooler, because it's like, oh, if we piss people off, like there's like the dude from Metal Injection here, and the dude from Relapse here, and the dude from Revolver here, and they all know the other band. So we gotta be on good behavior.
Right. Part of me wonders too whether this whole conversation is more centric to the doom stoner scene, which is the one I'm more tightly connected with. On average, we tend to be a little bit older. A lot of us came out of other scenes. Marijuana is sort of a common trope, but I don't smoke right now, but I know a lot of people do, and it does tend to have that calming effect on the temperament. So I think maybe we freak out a little bit more about conflict than other scenes do. So I got a friend in a death metal band. He thrives on conflict. Like it pumps him up. It gets his performance going. You know, it helps him write lyrics. You know, so he's probably listening and saying, "What's your problem?" Like, conflict is good.
I mean, I think that a lot of times it depends on the goals within the culture and the goals within the sort of way people act within that culture, if that makes sense. So that is to say, again, I think that stoner metal, probably more than other genres, has sort of like family guys playing in bands, right? I think you see that more. I think because the scene is older, right? Like people tend to have families and tend to have like other stuff going on. You know, I think that definitely, again, that impacts the dynamic, because then it becomes like being defensive about your hobby. Whereas I think for someone like Tom, where it's their job, I mean, you tell me, Tom, but I feel like for you, it's a little bit easier to kind of ignore some of this stuff, because for you, it's a job.
Yes and no. There are some things. I don't know. I'm 44 years old, and most of the shit that I see, I just go, it's not worth my time. Yeah. But I think that's something that comes with age too. I mean, the older you get,
evidently not in most of the scene.
I mean, I don't know. I think with most of the older musicians I know, they are mostly laid back, and it seems to be a lot of the younger, like under 30 crowd that seems to be on Facebook the most vocally saying stuff. But like a lot of the old school metal guys I know, they're very opinionated, and the guys that are the same age that are in the stoner scene are a little more laid back and just don't really care, you know. So I think the style of music also, for whatever reason, I don't know why, but I feel like the style of music, for me anyway, seems to be, a personality difference from person to person.
Yeah, I've noticed definitely I tend to gravitate toward different styles of music at different periods of my life. The more anxiety and uncertainty I have in my life, the more I want, something like screamo blaring from my speakers as I'm frantically driving between community college and work. But once I've got that degree in hand and first professional job and got married and things start to settle down a little bit more, my vibe instinctively changes a little bit. I want that slow and low. I'm still facing problems. I'm still having troubles, but somehow my approach is a little bit more contemplative these days. It could be an age thing, but it could be just seasons of life.
Mm-hmm.
So what does my obsession with country pop mean?
I'm not a psychologist here, buddy. I don't know. Well, you like to have a good time. I mean, I think a lot of it is a reflection of our personalities. You tend to be a glass half full type of guy, I've noticed. So it doesn't surprise me, that you would find more joy in that kind of music.
Florida Georgia Line are great, guys.
Okay, I don't doubt it. I'll take your word for it, though. I don't know. I'm just wondering whether relationships are going to survive 2020. Well,
right.
It's going to take a long time to mend some of those fences. I've just seen so many people draw their lines hard and fast, for all the best of intentions, and it's leading to alliances being formed. And if you're not with me, you're with them. Blah blah blah. And I don't know. What do you guys think? Am I overreacting, or do you think things are pretty bad right now in terms of?
I think things are pretty bad. I think, I don't know. I keep going back to the humility thing. I think that we're seeing just exactly how little humility there is in the world, not necessarily just with band people, but with just the world in general. I think you can turn on the news and see where humility and kindness is being, put into practice pretty visibly. And, and this type of situation makes people desperate and afraid, and those things tend to make you less worried about the guy next to you and worry more about yourself naturally. So I think this situation, has even made some people who, are normally very, very kind and empathetic, be a little more self-reliant. So I think, I don't know, I think that being humble, knowing when to shut your mouth, knowing when to, speak up, those are very important things in life. And I feel like the more this kind of thing goes on, the more those lines become blurred for the average person. And maybe we don't know when we should be quiet, when we should, speak up. So again, it goes back to this whole virus thing kind of amplifying things. I think, it's made a lot of good people be more self-reliant.
So there's this book I really like called Just Listen, right? By this guy, Mark Golston. And it's one of the most influential books in my life. And it's about, just listening and using that as your whole entire method of conflict resolution, right? Because most people feel stressed all the time. And I think all of us feel like we're very busy and we're trying to hold it together, and a bunch of people are relying on us, and if we fuck up, it's all going to go to shit. And I think a lot of people feel like that a lot. And so people kind of want to vent, so you kind of need to let them. And the problem is, right, when you're afraid, and I'm not this smart, I googled this while we were talking, when you're afraid, your brain goes into something called amygdala shock, where basically it's like going into like the lower levels of your brain, like the more like basic like animal and like lizard levels, right? And so what's happening right now, and again, I'm not a psychiatrist, I just read a book on it. Cute dog, Tom.
Thanks.
But this idea of amygdala shock is that when people are afraid, they're going on lower levels of their brain, right? So if you try to talk to people rationally in that sense, that's not going to work because they're not feeling rational. They're scared. And a lot of people are scared because why? Because we're going into a depression, because we're in a very politically divided environment. There's like 40 million jobless, right? So odds are, if you're talking to an adult, there's like a 1 in 3 chance they're jobless now or something crazy like that. All these things, like people are scared. When people are scared, they don't think rationally. And that's going to facilitate more negative behavior, and I think I think Tom is 100% right that, I think fear very much breeds arrogance, because I think it kind of comes from that, like, almost how, like, if you've ever, like, accidentally scared a small animal and it, like, puffs itself up to make itself look more intimidating,
right?
Like it's kind of that same concept. This is something I see in myself, and I had to go make some pretty major life changes last year to kind of handle some of that. You know what I mean? Like, I had to walk away from a lot of stuff because it was like, okay, this is fueling bad things. But it's hard because it's like, how the fuck do you walk away from stuff like that if it's the only thing making you money or keeping you alive or making you feel safe?
Right.
In a time where none of us are making money or staying alive or feeling safe. But really, you know what I mean? Like,
very true.
And it's not just because of coronavirus, it's also because of the political situation and the protests. And regardless of which side you fall on, although there obviously is a correct side, and if you're not on that side, you're a racist. But like, but people on both sides of the BLM thing are scared,
right?
You know what I mean? And I get it. I think you can argue about how much is justified. I think people don't understand that everyone is just kind of scared for a lot of reasons, and that a lot of I think that's why you're seeing more than usual a lot of these, like, people just blowing up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, a lot of it's just gut reaction, like you said, that fight or flight response. I kind of had an instant like that, not related to politics, but just we'll call it a misunderstanding with another media outlet about the use of some of my material and the notion of asking permission before uploading it as your own native content. And my first reaction was exactly what Matt described. It's just, it's almost an animal instinct to just hunker down, get defensive, and attack. I have a really good counselor right now, and he's kind of getting me back into this notion of mindfulness. And maybe this can transition our conversation a little bit into conflict resolution techniques. And this is a technique that I'm using more and more for myself. It's very hard to remember to be mindful, by the way. And mindfulness is just simply being able to detach yourself from what's happening at the moment and view it objectively. And it starts with you being aware of your breath. And then as you're breathing in, when thoughts come to your mind, you say that's a thought. When a feeling comes, you identify it as a feeling. When a sensation is occurring, you identify it as a sensation. And just that idea of classifying these things that are happening, these stimuli, as thoughts, feelings, and sensations has been really helpful to me, because it allows me to be more the detached scientist of my life and classify these things as a student, as a learner, rather than immediately drawing conclusions and attacking back. And because I've been practicing mindfulness, again, not religiously and not as much as I hope to eventually, but because just that simple act of detaching myself from the moment and looking at things objectively, I was able to reach out to the other party directly and resolve it in a way that was mutually beneficial for both of us. And that also factored in this whole notion of empathy that we're talking about, not assuming the worst motives from the other person.
Yeah.
Because maybe there is something, as much as it looks like the circumstantial evidence has drawn a very bad looking conclusion, maybe there is more to the story. And just by listening and appealing to this person's best instincts, I was able to resolve it within an hour. And this could have easily been an issue that dragged on for years and led to grudges and sides being taken. And it's frightening just to think of just how much something like that can lead to wedges being driven between people, between bands, between fans for decades to come.
Yeah.
Just based on how we respond as the parties involved in the original conflict.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, as we kind of move to the closing portion of our show, what are some things that have worked for you in resolving conflict in real life? Not just what looks like it might work as a theory, but what, practically speaking, are some ideas, some techniques, some practices that have actually worked for you in drawing conflict to a close for a particular situation.
Well, like I said before, I think listening is really valuable, and I think taking the time to sort of be like, tell me your side, man, show me, break it down, and then I think once you get people talking, that kind of lifts them out of that amygdala shock, right? And it forces them to sort of justify where they're angry with you. And then piece by piece, you can sort of elevate, right? And it's harder on the internet because it's harder to figure out like what else is going on with that person in a given space, but still like that's gotten me out of a lot of rough situations. It's just like, tell me how I fucked up, like how, and then also, this is from How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is the most important book in my life.
Dale Carnegie.
Oh, hell yeah. I want to get all the tenets like tattooed on my back, like I'm a no, but basically in it he has this idea of identifying what you did wrong and then apologizing for that, right? And I think that's really crucial, right? Is like start being the first one to apologize, right? Because no one ever wants to make the first move, and really the strong move is to make the first move, right? That's like the harder thing to do, that shows you are stronger, right? And so I think if you can sort of be the guy to do that and be the guy to just be like, look, here's how I fucked up, you're right, historically I haven't been able to fix it, this is how I plan to fix it in the future, but you're right and I'm wrong and you're right and I'm sorry, and just over apologizing like that tends to and identifying the problem specifically from their perspective, tends to let the other person see like, oh wow, okay, this person isn't a shitty psychopath. You know what I mean? Which I think is like sort of our immediate conclusion we jump to.
Yeah, I could definitely see that being disarming in a conflict.
I don't know. It's worked for me, very well across a variety of cultural backgrounds, and a variety of situations. Be it from like trying to get a bouncer to stand down to, whatever, like getting my family members to get along. You know what I mean? I think that same basic tactic, and I've seen it work really well on drunk people and people who are generally fucked up, and I've seen it work really well on people who are clear-headed. You know what I mean? But I think everyone's like, oh wow, you took the first step and tried to like fix it, and we're willing to admit you were wrong, even if you don't think you're wrong. Sometimes that's important. It's just being like, okay, like for me, like so little of this fucking matters, man. Like I just want to put out Coven records,
right?
And so just I don't know. What do you do, Tom? I'm always curious for your wisdom.
Well, I think communication really is the basis of everything with human interaction, regardless of whether it's bands or whatever. I think people need to communicate in a healthy way with each other and tell each other what's going on. I went to school for behavioral psychology, and they always used to tell us, the healthiest way to communicate is to tell the person, you did this and it made me feel this way. Leave out all the nastiness, all the nitpicking, and just get to the facts. This is what you did. It's what made me feel this way, and then the other person needs to understand that that's what they did, and they need to address that. My grandma used to tell me all the time when I was a kid, she would say that if you did something, even though it may not have been a bad thing, if it hurt someone else's feelings, it's a bad thing, and you need to address it and do something about it. So I've always tried to think that way, because it's instinctive to be like, well, that person just needs to toughen up. They need to, whatever. But I think there's a definite, upside to realizing that your words can be hurtful and your actions can be hurtful. I think communication is key. I've always liked to call this the dad talk. And what the dad talk is when you have a problem with somebody, you let them know, first of all, what they did. You chew them out like a dad, let them know what they did, tell them how it made you feel. But then you reinforce that with, I'm telling you this because I care. If I didn't care, I wouldn't address this. I wouldn't take the time to be here to bring this to you to try and fix it. Because if we don't care, we're just going to walk away. But if we do care, we're going to take the time to try and fix it. So I think it's important that we remind people, hey, I'm not saying this because I hate you. I'm saying this because I love you, because this relationship is important to me and I want to fix it. That's why I'm here. Because, people, their knee-jerk reaction when someone tells them something wrong is it's an attack. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to remind people that it's not an attack. It's us addressing the relationship so we can move on and have that relationship from that point forward. So for me, that's what I use. I like, when I have an issue, I confront people, I beat the shit out of it, I wrestle it to the ground, and I fix it there and then. I cannot live with, animosity just hanging there. Like, it's not my thing. I've never been that guy. I've always wanted to fix things immediately. It's just how I am. I have OCD really bad, and I just can't leave it alone. So for me, it's a little easier than it is for some people. Some people, a lot of people actually, they'll have an issue and they'll just walk around not talking about it, being pissed. And I'm sure you've heard it a million times. I don't know what so-and-so's problem is with me, but I think he doesn't like me. We've all heard that a million times, and it's because people aren't addressing things. They're not trying to communicate how they feel. And I think that's important. We need to let people know how they feel. We need to let them know where they stand with us. We need to let them know how they can be better at a relationship with us. We also need to be asking if we can do things to make the relationship better. It's not always the other person's fault. Sometimes it's our fault. So sometimes we need to say, hey, am I doing everything in this relationship the way I should be? And then we need to take that criticism, to heart and do what we need to do as well. So again, it goes back to humility, being able to be objective and know when you fucked up, like Matt said, know when you fucked up, listen, hear it, take it in, and then do something about it.
I dig it. Have either of you ever had to mediate a conflict between two parties?
Yes.
How does that work?
It's not fun.
I know I have a hard time with it.
Well, I'll share something with you. I had an experience. I won't tell you the band, but there was a bigger band.
Was it Metallica?
No, not that big. I unfortunately don't know anybody that big, but there's a bigger band that I know that tours a lot, and they had some beef with. There were two guys in the band that had some pretty serious problems with each other for a while, and it started when they were in Europe, and it escalated, got worse when they got home. It got to the point where one of them fired the other one, and the other one went around talking shit and just being a complete ass about it. Well, then the other one responded in kind, and they were both good guys who just had their feelings hurt, and their egos were hurt a little bit, and they both felt attacked. So what I tried to remind them of is, I got them together and I said, hey, look, you guys were friends before this. Fuck all the band shit. The band is secondary, but your friendship needs to come first. At least get the friendship back on track. So I told them, it's okay to not get along in a work environment like that, where you're in proximity to each other all the time, but still be friends outside of that. And it was tough. It took a little while, but we got them talking. We got them, being civil to each other, and they aren't as tight as they used to be. And I don't think in that situation you ever can be. But the animosity, the shit talk, all that stuff kind of stopped. And really that's what I was hoping for, was to kind of get them back to seeing that they were both people who were friends that just kind of didn't get along in this environment over here, and that they could exist as friends in this other environment. So that's all you can do sometimes,
That's really wise. I appreciate that. I think, just as kind of a side note, and this is kind of important, right? I think sometimes something you said earlier made me think of this, right? Sometimes I think we think that people hate us when really they don't feel any sort of way about us. And I think that if you internalize that enough about enough people, that makes people lash out, and I think that's why it's important to, Tom knows how much I just reach out to people I only barely know just to make sure they feel cared for a little bit. I think that's another big issue of our time, right? Is this idea that people hate me behind my back when really they probably don't, and they would like to get to know you better.
Yeah, that's true. So much of conflict comes from unchecked assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sometimes you never know till you actually talk to the people, and it might be a minor thing that's easily fixed with a simple, conversation.
Yeah, there's some really good insights. Matt, have you ever had the opportunity to mediate conflict between two parties?
Every goddamn day, baby.
It's kind of like what you do.
I mean,
It's your thing.
A lot of record deals feel that way. I think, I think it's tricky. I think Tom put it really well. Just this idea of putting the relationship above other parts and then going from there. You know what I mean? And I think if you can sort of maintain a relationship, then it's a lot easier to be oh, okay, now there are other things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that's usually how I try to approach it, is sometimes you have to sort of force mindfulness on the people you're mediating for.
Mm-hmm.
So in my case, it's frequently look, the record label feels this way because of X, Y, and Z. And you feel the way you do because of A, B, and C. So here's why the label feels their way. You tell me why you feel your way. And then maybe we'll start to
I like it.
You know what I mean? I don't know. Sometimes you gotta hold their noses shut and force the castor oil down.
Yeah. Just that idea of what I'm hearing is appealing to each other's best interest, taking time to listen, and then in the case where you're mediating between two people, getting them to listen to each other. All really basic things, but it can completely change the outcome of a relationship or an issue. Well, I noticed we're kind of close to time. As we're wrapping up, any parting thoughts or advice for those who might be going through conflict at this very moment, and it just seems so in their face, and it's something they can't stop thinking about, and it looks like it's on the verge of war, if not already full-blown conflict, out on the battlefield, blood spilling and everything. How would you advise people to kind of go from where they're at to a more peaceful resolution?
I'll just say a quote that I really like. There's a heavy blues guy named Mark Porkchop Holder that I truly believe is one of the smartest, most prophetic people I have ever met in my life. The guy is he's ridiculous. He's done everything. He's experienced everything. He's just an amazing person. But he had a quote one time that he told me. He's like, man, more people need to listen. And he's like, you don't learn by talking, you learn by listening. And I think the more we try to listen to other people and understand perspective, I think that helps with everything. I think in conflicts, it's good to shut up and listen. Our instinct is to talk, to defend ourselves, to respond to whatever is coming at us. But I think there's some merit in just saying, hey, I'm going to listen to you. What do you have to say? That's really, I think, the biggest thing. And I think that translates well in other parts of life too. I think that it's not just a band thing. I think it's a life thing that, let's learn more. Let's listen to people.
Yeah, how about you, Matt? Any
I
parting?
think that's exactly right. I think you should read that book by Mark Golston called Just Listen.
Mm-hmm.
The dude's super nice too. He'll like email you. I sent him an email just because I thought the book was cool, like not expecting him to reply. He totally emailed back. That dude rules.
Oh, that's cool.
So like, yeah, just listen, and point out how you fucked up. And I think that's what it comes down to, man.
Yeah. And I guess I'll just add to all of that great advice from both of you. Just try to envision a future in which the best possible outcome is achieved. Because I think a lot of times we just get used to this notion that it has to be this way, meaning, we're going to be continually at war with this party. But, there is the possibility that a good outcome can be achieved and enemies can even turn into friends. And it starts with you being able to mentally picture that. What does that look like? And then taking steps in that direction, which usually, as Tom mentioned, involves lowering your pride, which I think is something I'm challenged with just as much as the next guy. So I really appreciate the time that all of you have devoted to this hour, and I hope the discussion does some good to some people.
Thank you so much for having me. And
yeah. And just before we go, what's a good way that people can kind of get in touch with your work and what you all are doing? Tom, starting with you.
I mean, the band page, obviously, 20 Watt Tombstone on all the social media stuff. But we have a website with an email that goes right to me, goes right to my phone. So that's cool. 20watttombstone.com.
Right on, man. And Matt?
Follow me on Instagram at bacons.bits. Everything else is from there. You can find my company, Dropout Media. We do all the things.
Hell yeah. And I should mention that Matt has a weekly column at dimnandstone.com on Fridays called Bacon's Blog. I must call it Bacon's Bits, but that's something different. But yeah, Bacon's Blog, the most recent edition actually just talked about this, and he's got 3 key steps to getting closer to conflict resolution. So definitely check that out, dimnandstone.com. Thank you everybody for listening, and we'll catch you later. Doom on.
Take care.
The preceding was a presentation of Doomed and Stoned.